China facing sharp criticism from other spacefaring nations after debris from its out-of-control rocket plunged into the Indian Ocean, and that was yesterday morning. The rocket had launched a piece of a new Chinese space station to orbit at the end of April. Now, when the Long March 5B rocket had run out of fuel, it had been left to hurtle through space uncontrolled, after which intense speculation followed about where, in fact, it would land and if this would result in any casualties. But it's not the first time that space debris enters the Earth. To help us understand this a bit better, let's bring in the South African Space Agency's business manager, Tiaan Strydom, who joins us now via our video link. Tiaan, great to chat to you. Thank you so much for making time. Perhaps let's begin by putting this in perspective. Like I mentioned, we understand that stuff like this actually isn't new. Why then has this particular event drawn so much attention? What happened?
Good morning, Ayanda. Yes, I think quite interesting development. I think the biggest concern here was that normally when people launch these rockets or satellites, what they try to do is to bring the upper stage of the rocket back to Earth, but under a controlled manner. So basically what that states is to have an exact point where this piece of space junk is going to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and then plummet into the ocean. This was not the case with this Chinese rocket. It basically was uncontrollable, and that raised the biggest concern. So the possibility was there, although very small, to land onto landmass, and I think that was internationally was a big concern.
It does raise questions about what regulations, if any, are put in place by the international space community to ensure that things like this don't happen. I mean, what do you know about what China might have possibly ignored in order to get to a point where there's an out-of-control part of their rocket landing possibly anywhere on Earth?
Yeah, I think there's two things that normally have an influence on this. First of all, it's if you totally ignore international law, because the law basically states that you must have a booster or a thruster on board to make sure that you can actually do the re-entry, a controlled re-entry. And then the second thing is then if there's a problem on that controlling module and you're not able to control the space junk or piece of rocket, I think that's the second thing. In this case, I think it was more the first, where it was just not scheduled to have a re-entry module on board. And that being out of control. And I think that's what everybody is concerned about. We need to look after space. Space is something there for everybody, and internationally we agreed that everybody can use space. But we need to be sensitive towards the environment, outer space, not to have these pieces of space junk flying out there, and especially not having pieces of space junk re-entering the atmosphere. I think the biggest thing here as well that adds to that is that normally pieces of space junk are quite small, so that it easily burns up in the atmosphere. In this case, it was a huge piece. It's an order of 35 meters by 5 meters, so it's basically the length of two buses and about the width of two buses parked next to one another. So it's quite a huge piece, and that was the main thing why it didn't burn up in the atmosphere. Normally, these things, because you slow down the drag, it enters the atmosphere and it totally burns up. They don't have any debris falling to Earth. Unfortunately, in this case, it was just too big. I think the weight was in the order of 18 metric tons. So it was quite a big piece of space junk, so that should have been controlled.
So we kind of feel lucky that, the debris ended up in the Indian Ocean. There was very much a possibility that it landed on Earth and there could have been casualties. I suspect if that did happen, the latter, this would obviously spark some kind of diplomatic row. But now that nobody has been injured, does this mean that China effectively gets away with this?
I hope not. I think everybody internationally in the space community is putting pressure on every country to re-enter the satellites or pieces of space junk in a controlled manner. And I think that this was why the major role was out there, and everybody was up in arms about this, is just to create a little bit of visibility that we should be using our space assets responsibly.
Yeah. I mean, part of the statements that are quite striking that you've made this morning, at least ones that are resonating with me, is that everyone is allowed to get involved in what takes place in space. I wonder how true that is, though, because we know that that region of our universe is usually dominated by the USs of this world, the Chinas of this world, people with the armor, the equipment, really the kind of technological development to take place in that kind of activity. Speak to me about whether or not we do get a sense that there is a clear and a fair field for everyone to get involved, because I imagine nations in the global south can't be as involved as those in the global north for reasons that I've just outlined.
Yes, you're 100% correct. I think it's 100% true. The big thing here is that internationally, everybody signed, well, most of the countries signed a treaty years ago, that space is there for peaceful use. And that's what this is all about. You know, everybody needs to be a responsible user of space. Doesn't matter if you're big or small country, but you need to be a responsible user of space. You know, if I look at South Africa, we've got a couple of small assets in space. But in the end, every country, it doesn't matter if you're a commercial entity or a national space agency or anything like that. If you launch this piece of rocket or satellite or anything into space, the country, in the end, as a whole, will be responsible for that piece of space junk or satellite. So international law basically try to create an environment where everybody's fair, but we need to make sure that we are responsible users.
Absolutely. Well, one hopes that there'll be some kind of justice insofar as this event is concerned. Thanks very much indeed for your insights. Really do appreciate it here on the AM Report. Tiaan Strydom is the business manager of the South African Space Agency. Tiaan, once again, thanks very much indeed.